Afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Amanda, and I'm DWDC's Program Coordinator. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that while we are meeting virtually, the land Dying with Dignity Canada is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Indigenous, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and we invite and encourage you to do your own research regarding the various treaties, in particular, the land in which you're on while meeting with us today. So I am so thrilled to welcome you today to our first webinar of 2024. Through our webinars, we aim to provide you with information and key takeaways, as well as create a conversation on end-of-life topics alongside the professionals that know it best. Before we begin, however, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. Everyone on the call today is muted. However, there will be opportunities to submit your questions. To do so, please type your questions into the question bar on the Zoom side panel, and we will read it out for you at the end. In the interest of time, we ask that you please try to keep your questions as concise and clear as possible. And while we're not going to get to as many audience questions as possible today, unfortunately, we may not get to everyone. If you have any outstanding questions or questions that are quite personal in nature, please email us at support@dyingwithdignity.ca, and we will follow up with you. This session will be recorded, so there's no need for you to take notes. And finally, there's going to be a post-webinar survey that will pop up on your screen after the webinar and will give you the opportunity to share your feedback. So please stay tuned for that at the end. All right, let's get started with the session. So for today's special session, we'll be joined by members of our national office here at DWDC. And to get it started, I'm going to go ahead and pass the floor to our CEO, Helen Long. Helen, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Amanda. And thanks, everyone. I want to start by thanking you personally for coming, and not just coming today, but for showing up for us every day, whether it's by attending our webinars and using our resources, volunteering your time, contributing financially, or participating in our advocacy efforts, or I know for some of you, it's all of the above. All of those things are really, really important to us and help to move our agenda forward. So I want to really thank you for that. In today's webinar, we're going to talk a bit about our work in 2023. We're going to provide some updates about MAID in Canada, share our priorities in 2024, and of course, talk a little bit about how you can help with moving those priorities forward. And then at the end, as Amanda said, we're going to take some time to answer some questions. For me, 2024 is really focused on meeting the immediate needs of people across Canada. We've seen huge increases in the demand and the need for our services and support. So that's a huge focus for us. We had great success last year, really the last few years. And some successes, a lot of successes, but there's always more to do. So we're going to continue to meet those needs for education, support, and information, while at the same time staying really focused on our advocacy efforts so that we can legalize advanced requests and remove other barriers to MAID. So we're joined today, as Amanda noted, by several members of the senior team who will be sharing within their departments what's going on. And we're going to start off with Sarah Brighenshaw.
Great, thanks, Helen. Hi, everyone. I'm so glad to be here and to be able to speak to the incredible work that our volunteers do here at DWDC. Next slide, please. My name is Sarah, and I'm the Manager of Volunteer Engagement and Chapter Development. Not here presenting today, but an integral part of our team is Taylor, our Operations Coordinator, and together we handle the day-to-day support of the chapters and the National Office volunteers. Slide, please. Starting off with a quick by the numbers here, we have 10 chapters across Canada, which range in size and scope of their work, but which are all instrumental in bringing regional insight and feedback to our overall mission. I'm consistently impressed by the growing number of people looking to turn their support into real, tangible action, and I'm proud to share that right now we have more than 280 volunteers across the country. Within the volunteer team, there are at least 18 distinct volunteer roles, 18 different ways that volunteers help at DWDC, and whether that's through presentations, donor engagement, independent witnessing, outreach, advocacy, and so much more, we're so grateful for all that volunteers contribute to the organization. Slide, please. 2023 was a huge year for education. Our volunteers delivered more than double the number of presentations versus 2022. And we're especially noticing a return to more in-person presentations. We're just so grateful for all the time and energy our volunteers poured into sharing information with their communities last year. Slide, please. And while we don't quite have our final numbers for 2023, we do know that our volunteers were part of at least 7 large-scale community events like expos and seniors fairs. They delivered more than 110 presentations, workshops, and webinars on the subjects of end-of-life choice, facts about medical assistance in dying, and advanced care planning, and also that we reached at least 4,900 attendees at those events. We'll be publishing our final numbers as part of the annual report this spring, but in the meantime, I just want to share a special thank you to all the volunteers who made that all happen, and also to all the volunteers who helped out in countless other ways in 2023. And building on the increased demand for information about end-of-life choice, one of our main priorities in 2024 is to grow our number of presenters, specifically in areas where we don't currently have chapters. So we're looking to train presenters in places like Saskatchewan, New Brunswick, PEI, Newfoundland, and certain regions within Ontario and British Columbia as well. On top of that, our volunteers speak more than 24 different languages, so we'll also be translating some of our presentation material into new languages to help us reach more diverse communities in 2024 and beyond. Slide, please. So if either of those opportunities are of interest to you, or if you're looking for other ways to get involved, please feel free to email us at volunteer@dyingwithdignity.ca. Thanks again for this opportunity to share this update with you today, and I will pass it over to Kelsey.
Thanks so much, Sarah. Hi, everyone. My name is Kelsey Goforth, and I'm the Director of Programs at Dying with Dignity Canada. I'm pleased to present to you today the work of the programs team, which encompasses our support and education areas. So the team consists of myself, Kat, and Amanda in full-time roles. And as Sarah mentioned, Taylor splits her time between programs and volunteer engagement. And moving on, I'll begin by sharing 3 highlights from 2023. So firstly, we established a warm handoff program with 2 different provinces, those being Ontario and Nova Scotia, and we plan to secure 2 more in 2024. When people contact Dying with Dignity Canada's support team, our aim is to connect them with the resources that are applicable to their concerns and their needs at that time. And this includes referring people to mental health supports and crisis lines. We're also very close to launching a new resource that was completed in 2023, and that is our What Happens During a MAID Death booklet. This guide was designed to help prepare family and friends for what they may experience when their loved one has an assisted death. It covers topics such as how the MAID medications work, what physical changes someone might see as their loved one dies with MAID, as well as information for those who may wish to stay with or care for the body after a MAID death. And finally, we launched our Death Dialogues program in 2023. We hosted 10 4-week groups with about 75 participants total. And through our data collection, 93% of participants were likely to recommend the program to a friend. And on the next 2 slides, we have a few quotes from Death Dialogues participant feedback. So some highlights from participants include the different participants in the groups being responsive to each other, feeling safe in their sharing, appreciation for the themes and the question prompts, having excellent facilitators, deep listening, and diversity of participants and perspectives. And moving to the next slide, they expressed gratitude for the experience and their feelings about it being a beneficial program. One said that having open discussion about death and dying is actually very life-affirming. So if anyone on the call today is interested in participating in this program, please fill out our post-webinar survey. There's a sign-up option specifically for Death Dialogues in that survey, and be sure to share your contact information so we can reach out to you with more details. So we're moving on now to some of our priorities for 2024. So one is regarding our webinar delivery. We want to continue hosting speakers from new and diverse communities, as well as those who can speak to a wide range of topics related to death and dying, just as we will continue to ask you, our webinar attendees, about what your experience was like. We're also going to survey our knowledgeable guest speakers about their experience with us and their suggestions for future webinar topics and speakers. Another goal for this year is to create educational resources that speak specifically to those in allied healthcare. So people like occupational therapists, PSWs, and others, and to train volunteers on special considerations when presenting to these groups. We also plan to undertake some additional planning and consideration of new programs that DWDC could launch. Some of you may have participated in our 2023 supporter survey that went out at the end of last year. As part of that survey, we wanted to identify gaps and needs within the community, and we will be looking to those survey results as we consider our work in 2024. Thank you so much for listening today, and I'm now going to pass it along to our Director of Government and Stakeholder Relations, Chris Jones.
Right. So, yeah, I do government and stakeholder relations, but I do it actually in conjunction with Helen, who takes extensive involvement in advocacy. And also I do it with the assistance of a lobby firm that's based here in Ottawa named Blackbird Strategies, who helps us out with securing meetings. So I have the assistance of two other folks. So I just want to run through kind of the highlights from last year. The first issue I would like to mention is the issue that took place on the west coast of Canada in Vancouver, which concerned the tragic passing of a young woman named Samantha O'Neill. Her kind of abortive attempt to get MAID resulted in her being forced out of her institution, St. Paul's, and having to move to another place. And in the process, having been sedated, she didn't regain consciousness and had MAID without having a chance to say goodbye to her family. So I think this essentially awakened public sympathies about the situation with forced transfers in faith-based facilities. And we worked very closely with the Metro Vancouver chapter, local clinicians, the BC humanists, to bring the spotlight to the reality of IROs and what people were having to face with often vulnerable, frail, and elderly folks. Now, a little later, well, actually this fall, the health minister, Adrian Dix in British Columbia, announced a kind of weak compromise around the St. Paul situation, which is run by, as many of you would know, by Providence Healthcare. But that isn't an altogether satisfactory solution, and the workaround doesn't really address the continuing forced transfers at hospitals and hospices run elsewhere by Providence Health and other religious health groups that oppose MAID. Next slide, please. A second issue that I would say was pretty significant was the vote that took place in Parliament on October the 18th. This was a vote on a private member's bill sponsored by Ed Fast, Conservative MP from British Columbia. And he had sensing the mood of the House, had put together a very simple and somewhat crude motion, which basically said that a mental disorder was not a grievous and irremediable medical condition. And of course, we were quite concerned about that. So in response, we disseminated some videos by Jocelyn Downey and John Scully, which argued that differential treatments of illness, stigmatization of the mentally ill, and violation of charter rights could not be condoned in the 21st century. So in the event, during the vote, that bill was defeated. We managed to cobble together, I think, the majority of the folks we needed, but it was a close run thing. 8 Liberal MPs voted in favor of the Conservative bill. The NDP caucus also voted in its entirety for the bill, but fortunately, the balance of the Liberal caucus and the entirety of the Bloc Québécois voted unanimously against it. So we defeated the bill on principle. However, we're still in a situation where the second version of this committee is being reconstituted and has heard evidence and is now drafting a report. So we await that with a certain amount of trepidation. Next slide, please. So the final kind of highlight, I guess, of the year, and it started late last year and has continued over into 2024, is the going live of our petition E4726. It went live on December 15th. It will be active for 60 days. It's sponsored, as you can see, by the Liberal MP for the Yukon, Brendan Hanley. And so far, as of this morning, it had collected over about 10,200 signatures. So this is a critical step in showcasing the support for advance requests from Canadians, persons across Canada from coast to coast. We're engaged in a multi-channel promotional effort, and we're hoping that this will be one amongst several other things, including further polling data, individual meetings with MPs, when we have it, meetings with the ministers concerned, that may eventually force the government's hand to a certain extent to either prioritize the legislation that's presently in the Senate and being sponsored by Senator Pamela Wallin, or encourage the government to bring forward its own bill sponsored by the Justice Minister. But I think our general view is we kind of have to see where things go with MD-SUMC first. Next slide, please. So with advance requests, which, as Helen pointed out, is our #1 priority in this calendar year, this issue is somewhat complicated by the intense parliamentary focus on MD-SUMC and the distorted presentation of the facts around this issue by the media and pundits that are out there. So our attempt to kind of carve out some oxygen and space for advance requests is constantly bombarded by the hyperbolic coverage of the other issue, MD-SUMC. So, but just to say that notwithstanding that, the advocacy, marketing, and comms teams have worked together on the production of videos, op-eds, emails, letter writing, the petition, of course, all designed to create a critical mass of support for the cause of advance requests. And our multi-channel effort has been dedicated to raising public awareness of this gap in our MAID laws and urging our supporters to reach out to our lawmakers. So our hope is that in 2025, assuming the life of this parliament lasts, beyond this current calendar year, that we would have sufficient time to make an advance request legal for those who have a diagnosis. Next slide, please. The other thing, just to say that we did focus intensely and as a matter of principle on MD-SUMC. So as the MD-SUMC readiness was being examined by the AMAD committee, we took a part in that exercise, which was a little bit of in some respects, a flawed exercise. They were deluged with presentations, and then in the end of the day, it's not clear that those presentations were consulted, but nonetheless, we drafted one, we submitted it. At this point, I can say that omens are a little bit discouraging. I can't say definitively which way they're going to go, but we have made our case for the charter rights of folks afflicted with these disorders. We've been assembling video testimonials from experts and those afflicted with acute and chronic mental disorders to argue for the end of the sunset exclusion clause, which, as you will all know, is due to expire in March, but requires this 11th hour green light from the committee and presumably the government at that point. But there are indications, if we're frank with you, that the opponents of this measure have hijacked, maybe too strong a word, but have certainly shaped and molded the public opinion around this issue. And there's been a lot of fear mongering done, which hasn't been particularly helpful to this cause. So next slide. The other area that I think that we would look to be very present on and active in is in relation to institutional religious obstruction, IROs. which we know to be a problem in a number of the Western provinces. And certainly from conversations I've had recently in a lot of the rural and remote parts of Ontario, less of an issue in Quebec, where they have a very strong and pronounced commitment, principled commitment to secular delivery of healthcare and have banished a lot of this stuff. But unfortunately, there are these residual holdovers from Canada's kind of 19th century and early 20th century, where IROs still exist, and religious administrators manage to have some discretion and say in the range of available treatments open and available to patients. And so we have been working, as I mentioned off the top, in British Columbia, but we'll also be working in, we think, in Manitoba, where there has been a change of government, and we hope to get that process underway this quarter, the first quarter of 2024, with the new Manitoba government, which has made some commitments to make some major reforms to healthcare, and we look to want to step up our advocacy going forward on that file, wherever we can see an opportunity, essentially. And ironic, we see in other provinces such as Saskatchewan and Alberta, if anything, them moving in another direction and making it more difficult. So we are selective and we make progress, as Helen points out, where opportunities arise. I think that's great. And I'm gonna pass it on at that point. And thank you. I'll be happy to take any questions at the end. Thanks.
Okay, hi everyone. It's wonderful to be here with you speaking about the work of marketing and communications. I'll get started with the first slide, Amanda, if you would. So my name's Alicia and I'm the manager of marketing and communications. And together with Sarah and Jean-Gilles, we are responsible for all of the communications that you see from Dying with Dignity Canada on social media, by email, on our website, on our blog, in the media, and any of our downloadable resources and materials. Next slide. In 2023, one of our largest projects was the development of a documentary about MAID. It was called In My Own Time. Early in the year, we were approached by a pair of documentary filmmakers about the opportunity to educate people about end-of-life choice through the stories of 3 people who chose to access MAID. We knew this film had the potential for a lot of impact, but we were overwhelmed by the response. Next slide. In My Own Time premiered in Toronto on World Right to Die Day in November, and over 300 attendees were among the first to watch the film and hear directly from the filmmakers and a local MAID assessor and provider in Toronto. Next slide. In 2023, 9 other screenings took place across Canada and online. Supporters in Ontario, Nova Scotia, British Columbia, and Saskatchewan all got the opportunity to watch the film in person, thanks in large part to the support of our chapters across the country. For those who couldn't attend in person, we hosted 3 online screenings over Zoom in December, and so far we've counted over 4,000 attendees, and the response has been fantastic. I will speak more to upcoming screenings and future viewing opportunities later on in the presentation, but for now I'll move on to Instagram here. So in 2023, we launched our Instagram account to connect with social media users who are not regularly active on Facebook and Twitter. And over the past 8 months, we've cultivated a strong community who are passionate about end-of-life rights and choice. Our content on Instagram is designed to be educational, informative, and visually engaging. Next slide, please. So if you haven't already and you are active on Instagram, you can follow us at DWD Canada. Next slide. One of the key ways we provide education to the public is through the development of resources. In 2023, we launched this resource called How to Be a Patient Advocate and ran a social media campaign to encourage downloads of this comprehensive resource. Next slide. Within this resource, we provide information on becoming a patient advocate, what's involved in that role, and additional resources that can be helpful along the way. So if you, your children, your grandchildren, or anyone else in your circle would like to learn more about advocating for a patient in your life, you can download this resource on our website. Next slide. These are the faces of the stories that we told through video in 2023, some of which Chris has already mentioned. In total, we released over 15 videos through social media, in addition to our regular webinars and the documentary. So we are continuing to post videos in 2024 about MAID and mental disorders, as well as advance requests and other end-of-life topics. Next slide. Moving on to a highlight of some of our 2024 projects, we have 2 more in-person screenings of In My Own Time taking place in Western Canada this month. There will be one in Vancouver on January 27th, and then another one in Calgary on January 28th. We are exploring opportunities to host a couple of additional online screenings for those who couldn't attend in person or online in December. So we'll release more information on our social media channels and by email as the plans develop. So be sure to follow us or sign up for updates on our website. Next slide. We will develop and release one new resource to inform and educate a younger audience about topics related to end of life. So we're currently in the phase of brainstorming topics. And if you have any ideas on what gaps you think exist in our resources, please let us know. You can email us at communications@dyingwithdignity.ca. Next slide. And finally, we will be releasing a new and improved advanced care planning kit that we've been working on in collaboration with our local chapters. The new kit will be simpler, more concise, fully accessible, and user-friendly to make it as easy as possible for people to think about and express their wishes for end of life. The new kit will be available to download from our website in April to align with Advanced Care Planning Month. So that is a review of what we're doing in 2024, among many other things, as marketing and communications does support all of the different departments at DWDC, but these are some of the main highlights. So thank you for taking the time to join us today, and I will pass it back to Helen.
Oops, on, off, on, off. Okay, thanks, Alicia. Thanks, everyone, for listening. I know that was a lot of information in a short period of time. And if you keep in mind, that was the top 3 highlights from most of our teams. You can imagine how we were feeling by the end of December last year. So 2 things I just want to clarify before we move on, and apologies, we will make a note to be sure and be clear in the future. 2 of the terms that we use really frequently in the office, MD-SUMC, that stands for, it's basically MAID, where a mental disorder is the sole underlying medical condition. So that is the legislation that came through C7. It's been delayed once, but you know, in theory, should be changing on March 17th of 2024. Chris spoke a bit about the fact that we're very concerned at this point. I think that there will be a further delay to that. But that's the legislation that deals specifically with those who have a mental disorder as their only underlying condition. The second acronym we used is IROs, and that's an institutional religious obstruction. Just for a little more clarity on what that is, that's what you've heard us talk about in the past, mainly as a forced transfer, where someone is in a hospital, as Sam O'Neill was, and is forced to move to another facility in order to have their MAID procedure. But it's important to note that IROs are not just forced transfer. So they can be any barrier to MAID, which is a religious obstruction. So not being able to move into a hospice, for example, because you think you might want MAID at the end of your life, not getting the information you need, not getting an effective referral to a clinician who will support you with MAID if the clinician you're dealing with doesn't. So just a little clarity around that. So apologies, and we'll make sure we're a little better about spelling those out the first time moving forward. Now I'm going to hand it back to Amanda, and Amanda is going to moderate your questions and answers with us, and the rest of the team is going to come back to help with the question answering.
That's right. Thank you so much, Helen, and thanks to the rest of the team for the presentation. We'll start off first with some questions that we received through our submissions in our registration. So thanks so much to folks who sent those in. And I think we'll start with an easy breezy question, and we'll direct this to Helen. This audience member asks, how is DWDC, Dying with Dignity Canada, and MAID connected? Are they separate entities?
Yes, that's a great question that I am happy to clarify. So yes, they are absolutely separate entities. Dying with Dignity Canada is a charitable organization. We have certainly been very loud and persistent in our efforts to get assisted dying legislated, but we do not have any official healthcare responsibility in the process. MAID itself is owned by the government. It's a federal legislation, and it's delivered provincially through every healthcare agency in the country. So in Ontario, through the Ontario Ministry of Health, and Alberta through the Ministry of Health, and Alberta Health Services, and so on and so on. So there's no connection in terms of the legality and the ability to access MAID. Where we do have some shared responsibility that I think we take on as a responsibility is we help you to find your way through those government channels to get to the MAID process when you need to. So very much separate entities, but some overlap in terms of us coordinating and helping to get people through the MAID process.
All right, thanks audience member, and thanks Helen. Next question we'll pose to Helen as well as Chris from advocacy. This question is related to institutional religious obstructions, IROs. This audience member asks, when can we expect to see the court challenge to IROs of MAID?
Yeah, so I'll take that one just because I think I'm closest to it. That's what I like to call a how long is a piece of string question. Our hope is the end of January, early February. I can tell you that the lawyers are working hard on the paperwork that we need to have finalized to make that happen. And then it's out of my hands. So currently our hope is end of January, early February, but we will definitely keep you posted. You'll be the first to know.
All right, thanks audience member, and thank you, Helen. Let's answer some questions now for Marcom. So for Alicia, this audience member asks, is it possible to do publications or editorials on newscasts or interviews with TV journalists so more of the public is aware about MAID?
Yeah, certainly. That's a great question. In 2023, we had over 140 engagements with the media through our own op-eds and letters to the editor, background calls and interviews on TV, radio, and paper. So you can see many of these engagements in the media center of our website if you'd like to take a look and see some of the things that we've done. And certainly we will continue responding to any opportunities that come our way and engaging with the media on important issues like advance requests, MAID and mental disorders, and institutional religious obstructions. So stay tuned and you'll see more of it.
All right, fantastic. And this is a follow-up question for you as well, Alicia. This audience member asks, what general public outreach programs are planned for 2024?
We do have a few public outreach campaigns scheduled in 2024 in addition to our daily outreach communications. So the first is a national awareness campaign that we're putting out through social media very shortly. Probably by the end of January, we will launch that. And that will be through social advertising. The second will be in relation to advanced care planning when we launch the new and improved kit in April to reach new communities. And the third will be with the new resource that I mentioned to educate younger demographics. So we'll do a similar campaign to what we did in 2023 with how to be a patient advocate. Those are the three main ones that we have planned, but certainly every single day things can come up and we continue to promote and try to reach new audiences.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. Final question here from an audience member. They're asking about the documentary In My Own Time and are wondering, will the documentary be available for free to stream on DWDC's website?
It will, not necessarily on DWDC's website, but we are exploring opportunities with the filmmakers currently on where that will be hosted. So right now, the plan is tentatively to have that released in April, but that is pending some conversation with the filmmakers. So stay tuned. We will be posting it on social media and sending an email as soon as it's available. I know that a lot of people have shown great interest in this documentary. So if you are in Vancouver or Calgary, please attend in person if you can. Otherwise, we'll release new opportunities as they're available.
Wonderful. So stay tuned, everyone. Thank you, Alicia. Let's move on to some questions from advocacy, and these will be directed towards Chris and Helen. This audience member asks, and Helen, you touched on this a little bit, and Chris as well in your presentation, and maybe you can just elaborate where you feel necessary. This audience member asks, do you believe medical assistance in dying for persons solely with a mental disorder will go forward in March 2024? Are there any updates on that?
I can happily answer that, Helen. So some of the recent signals we've picked up are not encouraging, I think, as Helen alluded to. However, we must wait until the end of this month, between the 29th and 31st, when the House comes back, to know definitively what's going to happen there. But we are prepared for all options at this point. I don't think we have a very high degree of confidence, as Helen said, that this is likely to be immediately, the sunset clause is going to be lifted in March. So that's our reality at this point.
Thank you, Chris. Helen, anything to add before we move on?
I think just to add that just in terms of timing, so people have a bit better sense, officially what is being waited on is the final report from the Special Joint Committee back to the government to say how they feel about the state of preparedness across the country. That's expected to be issued, I believe it's January 31st, but anyway, the very end of January when the House returns. And then we should know, I think, quite quickly whether the government will table a bill in order to change that date or not. So in terms of the steps, that's what's happening next for people.
Wonderful. Thank you, Chris and Helen. This is a follow-up question related to MAID and mental disorders. This audience member asks, who should I write to express my position on MAID and mental disorders aside from my member of parliament? Beyond letter writing, are there any other advocacy efforts that supporters like myself can participate in?
So I would say that's a good question. I would say definitely write to Health Minister Mark Holland. He would be key on this file. And also the Minister of Mental Health and Addictions, Yara Sachs, would be somebody I would be strongly tempted to write to. And as you mentioned, your own MP, I think always helps. In terms of other advocacy efforts, I think just involve yourself in the tools that we have created on our website. I think, the challenge that some folks will have is that speaking about, say, their own mental health publicly is always a somewhat intimidating thing. So if you want to speak anonymously, that's not a problem at all. And we do what we can to support this cause as strongly as we can. Yeah, I don't know if you'd have anything else to add, Helen.
Just to remind people that if they visit our website, dyingwithdignity.ca, under the advocacy tab, you can find our current priorities. And for each of those priorities, there is a place where you can write that letter to the people that Chris has indicated. So there is one made for those with mental disorder. Just click on it and you can personalize the text in the letter to the right. So that's on our website under advocacy, current priorities.
All right, thank you, Helen and Chris. This is going to be final question related to MAID and mental disorders and advocacy. Where do each of the three major political parties in Canada stand on MAID, especially MAID and mental disorders, and how will that impact 2024 and 2025 efforts?
So what I could say there is that in terms of an issue like that, these technically at least tend to be votes of conscience. So, but we do detect a certain amount of homogeneity in how the parties line up on these issues. So if I was to kind of summarize, I'd say the Conservatives are largely hostile to any expansion of MAID, both certainly MDS-UMC and probably in the main, given the leadership direction given by Pierre Poilievre and so on, probably also on advance requests, although we don't know definitively. And many of those Conservative MPs will be mindful that there are constituents in their ridings who adamantly support advance requests. So we'll have to see how that one would shake out. With the Liberals, I would say they have been generally a little bit reluctant or hesitant because of the media storm about MDS-UMC, but a little bit, I would say, willing and open and enthusiastic about advance requests. So I think that they're kind of a little bit cautious on the first one, and from my own meetings with them, fairly positive about the second one. I would say unambiguously with the Bloc Québécois that they are pro both measures. Unambiguously, they support MDS-UMC, against, funnily enough, their own provincial government, which is kind of more lukewarm, if not opposed to it. And also they are very strongly in favor of advance requests. And finally, with the NDP, I would say they are, if we take their vote on EdFast private members bill, they are anti-mental health as a sole underlying mental disorder, but pro-advance requests. So that's kind of just how they line up in a larger sense.
All right, thank you so much for that, Chris. Let's move on to some questions more related to the support and education side of things. Now, I do want to clarify that the focus on today's webinar is the work of Dying with Dignity Canada, but we will try to answer questions that are more common about clarifying where the law stands. But if you do have a question that's more specific to your own personal circumstances that you or a loved one might be going through, we urge you to connect with us at support@dyingwithdignity.ca, and we can answer your question directly and more thoroughly. With that being said, let's get into some of our registration questions here. So Kelsey, this audience member asks, can you please tell me a bit more about the time frame that it takes to get approved for medical assistance in dying?
Sure. Thanks, Amanda. So this will depend on a few different factors. So one factor that's laid out actually in the federal legislation is related to track 2, which is when somebody's death is not reasonably foreseeable. So for a person in that situation, the assessment period is going to be a minimum of 90 days. It is often longer because of the complexity of people who are coming forward and sort of their medical histories. It often takes quite some time to do those assessments. So when you're looking at the law, that's the only timeline that's laid out. However, the other factor is what's going on locally in a community, how many assessors there are who are available, how many other cases and people that they're supporting at that time. All of these things are going to have an effect on how long somebody's waiting to see an assessor and then how long their assessment process will take. What MAID teams from coast to coast tend to do is triage. So if somebody is imminently dying, of course, they're going to try to get them connected with assessors as quickly as possible. But for those who are considering MAID, having a call to the MAID coordination team earlier in their disease trajectory is often the best bet, just to understand how long those assessments might take.
All right, thank you so much to the audience member and Kelsey for that question. As a follow-up, this audience member asks, how do you move forward with a request for MAID if your family doctor is not willing to support you?
Yeah, that's a great question. So regardless of the province that you're in Canada or the territory, there are care coordination services in each of the provinces or territories. So we do have a list of those contacts on our website. Most of those do not require a referral from a doctor. Some do, there are a few exceptions. But overall, a person or their family member could call that MAID team and then be connected with a MAID provider in their area who could go through the process with them.
All right, thank you so much for that. All right, let's do one final follow-up question here for Kelsey. This audience member asks, and Chris, maybe you can jump in as well. This audience member asks, does a waiver of final consent not achieve the same goal as the recent petition to the House of Commons?
I can maybe start, and Chris, if you want to jump
Sure.
in. So we, almost 3 years ago now, in March 2021, we did get the option for what's called a waiver of final consent. With a waiver, it's only applicable to people in certain scenarios. So one of those scenarios is that they do have to have what's considered a reasonably foreseeable natural death, and they have had to have gone through the MAID process. So they've filled out the forms that are required, they've met with at least 2 assessors, and they've been found eligible. And the other thing with a waiver is that you must set a date for when you want MAID to happen. So we most commonly think of waivers being used in situations where somebody might have an important date coming up. So a wedding or a birthday or the holiday season or something like that. And they're saying, you know, I'd really like to make it to so-and-so's wedding, but I'm also acknowledging that I am at risk of capacity loss. And if I don't get there, if I lose capacity beforehand, I would still like a clinician to move forward on that date. So what's accomplished with an advanced request, if it does become an option, would be that requirement for setting a date, first of all, wouldn't be there. It would be more based on certain conditions having been met that the person lays out as, this is when I would like MAID, not this specific date that's required in the waiver of final consent. So Chris, anything that you wanted to add?
No, that's
to
excellent. I think, yeah, that's the main distinction, is that with an advanced request, all you need is a diagnosis. You don't need to have been formally assessed for MAID. And usually, as Kelsey pointed out, you are writing down in a witnessed written document the triggering conditions, the things that once they materially emerge, maybe a loss of capacity to recognize your family or whatever the issue is, that a MAID agent or a trusted third party, as Quebec, which has kind of blazed the trail a bit here, has described them, is somebody would then alert a clinician, this person's conditions that were specified in a written document have now been met. I'd like you to observe and verify them, doctor. And that doctor would then say, yes, I corroborate what we're seeing and what the person indicated, and I will then, so it's going to sort of, it's for those people who've got a degenerative neuro condition quite often, although not exclusively, and that those wishes would be respected when those conditions were met. So that's what's missing in the law at the moment.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Chris and Kelsey. And let's ask a follow-up question here on the topic of advance requests. And Chris, we might direct this question to you most prudently. So this audience member asks, since Quebec has now approved advance requests for MAID, when is it expected that the rest of Canada will adopt this?
So that's a really good question, and it poses some interesting constitutional dilemmas, because as even the Quebec authorities would recognize and acknowledge, this matter of an advance request is regulated and the preserve of the federal government under the criminal code. And until they make it legal, there is some question as to whether Quebec would be acting outside of the parameters of the criminal code if any of their clinicians chose to act on an advance request. So in many ways, I think this explains why some of the other provinces have held off putting forward legislation themselves or regulatory changes, because they're waiting to see what the feds are going to do with the criminal code. And I think if push came to shove and we got to a conflict, the feds would then, and Quebec, you know, because this isn't available in Quebec for about another 18 months. The law has been acted, but the regulations have not yet been sort of fleshed out. And so the issue will be, what does the federal government do in the interim? They know Quebec wants to move in this direction, and they either bring their own laws into alignment, or they, much more, I would say, unlikely, repeal the Quebec law, which would cause a bit of a constitutional kerfuffle. So that's kind of the situation with Quebec.
Wonderful. Thank you. And as a follow-up question, very closely linked to this query, how likely is advance requests for MAID across Canada to become an option?
Well, as I say, I think if the federal government makes that change, if we can convince the Justice Minister or Parliament to pass Senator Wallin's bill, which specifically calls for advance requests, I think if that happens, then I think in short order, subject to the creation of all the regulatory safeguards and some issues that we've tried to point out about the length and tenure of an advance request, how long would it be good for, some of the indemnities you need to sort out for a clinician who might be acting, you know, on the strength, you know, somebody, his patient would be not necessarily competent, and he would be proceeding, or he or she would be proceeding towards a very final act. But so there do need to be some indemnities set about there, and some of the language about what constitutes accurate witnessing and all that. But I think subject to that, I think it could happen fairly quickly. But I would say that the principle of it could be enacted within, if we get this parliament to last into 2025, in the next 12 months. As to when it would be available to patients, it could be slightly longer than that.
Wonderful. Thank you, Chris.
I think,
right,
Amanda,
sorry, go ahead, Helen.
sorry, can we just remind people though that, you know, one really important thing that can help to move this agenda is public support. So if you haven't already signed the petition, E4726, you can find that on the House of Commons website or on our website. I don't know if we can put it in the chat, but please do that and take some action there, because every public supporter who says I want an advance request just helps to contribute to that number, and write a letter to your MP. And again, you can find that in the advocacy section of our website under current priorities.
Wonderful. Thank you, Helen. All right, next question is directed towards Alicia, and it's a question about the new advanced care planning kit. I think this audience member just wants some clarification on how soon they can expect the new kit to be available.
Yeah, thanks for the question. So April is Advanced Care Planning Month. So the plan is to launch the new kit for download on our website on April 1st. So again, we'll send it out by email and on social media as soon as it's available. So if you're not following us, please go ahead and do that.
All right, wonderful. Thank you so much, Alicia. This question is more related to funding and the development side of DWDC, so I'll direct this to Helen. This audience member asks, I would like to see CEOs donating as well as individuals. Why does DWDC not collaborate with corporate sponsors? There could be a lot of opportunity there.
Yeah, thanks for that question. We touched base with Ryan Lindsay, our development director, to get a few more details strategy-wise to share with you. So we do have some individuals who are CEOs, so in effect CEOs contributing, but often we're not aware of someone's work role in the context of their work with us. We focus our work primarily on individual donors and small foundations, as well as bequests, because we still feel that there's a lot of opportunity for us there. Corporations, generally speaking, corporations like to more sponsor something. So they want to attach their name to it. Often it's tied to an event or an activity. And we haven't, been able to find, we haven't really found the right opportunities. And I think it's a very limited space for us. So for now, we're focusing our efforts where we are, and then down the road, corporations may be somewhere to look at, but we also know corporations give a much smaller percentage of their income than individual Canadians do. So again, that's kind of where we focused our strategy for today.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Helen. This next set of questions are more related to medical assistance in dying and the law. So Kelsey and Helen, feel free to jump in as you feel necessary. This audience member asks, if my husband dies before I do, am I eligible to access MAID? He is a huge part of my physical and emotional support from day to day.
Thank you for the question. So I think there's a couple parts here that I'd like to address. So the first is related to people's relationships and supports in their life. So if this person is getting at sort of the role of their husband in their own MAID request, that role is that there really isn't one. So a person can't request MAID on behalf of someone else. Somebody who is providing care for someone, for instance, can't say, I am requesting and consenting to MAID on my parent, spouse, whoever's behalf. So if that's what the person is getting at, then I just want to be clear that an individual must consent to MAID themselves and go through the process themselves. If they're saying that if their husband dies and because of needing them and mourning their death and wanting MAID for that reason, a person does need to have an illness, disease, or disability to be able to access MAID. There needs to be decline in capability, there needs to be suffering, there needs to be various criteria that's met. So that's not really a question we can answer about individual circumstances, but to be clear, a person does need to have a medical condition to access MAID. It can't be because of any other reason.
All right, thank you for that, Kelsey. Next question from our audience member, and this I think touches on what you just spoke of about a voluntary request for MAID. But as a follow-up question, this audience member asks, as power of attorney for my husband with advanced Alzheimer's, can I request MAID for him on his behalf?
No. So the answer to that is no. The law does state that a person needs to consent to MAID themselves. They need to have informed consent. They need to be the ones who are saying to the clinician that they would like to move through with MAID. They're active in the assessment process with the clinicians. There's no option for anyone else, a power of attorney, substitute decision maker, friend, family, anybody else to consent to MAID on behalf of somebody who doesn't have capacity.
All right, thank you for that. Final follow-up question here. This person is asking, I live currently in Mexico. Can I plan ahead for MAID in the event that I become disabled, either physically or mentally?
So again, this question kind of seems, there may be two things that we can address. So the part about living in Mexico, individuals who are looking to access MAID in Canada must be eligible for healthcare in Canada. So that means that they need to be usually a permanent resident or a Canadian citizen. So if somebody is neither of those things, then MAID isn't an option in Canada. And then in terms of planning ahead for MAID, so the only option with any sort of planning ahead component is the waiver of final consent. And as we talked about earlier, that's only applicable for people who have gone through the process. So that means that they are eligible for MAID today. They've been assessed, they've been approved, they've done all the procedural pieces, and they're just saying, I might want MAID at a later date, and I'm giving consent for MAID at that later date. But it is only applicable for people who already meet the criteria, not for somebody saying in 30 years from now, in 10 years from now, if something happens, I want MAID. So that's where we stand right now with the eligibility criteria.
All right, thank you so much for that. This follow-up question here is about advanced care planning kits, but it's also related to MAID. So Alicia and Kelsey, feel free to jump in where you think it's applicable. This audience member asks, is it possible to include an advance request for MAID or specific instructions for MAID in my advanced care directive? For example, if I became incapacitated or incompetent as a result of an accident.
Yeah, so as the law stands today, advance requests for MAID are not legal. So anything that you write in your advanced care planning kit or advanced directive in relation to MAID would not be legally able to be carried out either by your substitute decision maker or by any clinician. However, including an advanced request in your advanced directive or advanced care planning kit does not invalidate any other part of your kit. So if you'd like to write down those instructions in the event that advanced requests become legal in the future, you can do so. It's just that at this point in time, nobody can carry out those wishes because advanced requests are not legal.
I think also, Amanda, let's just to, I think, caution people, you can do that, but because advanced requests are not currently legal and we don't know exactly what the framework will look like, there is no guarantee that even if the law changes, that will go ahead. So certainly something you can do as a planning mechanism, but until the law changes, we won't know, exactly what will and won't be acceptable in that request. And I think just to go back to, I think, a couple of the questions that have been asked. So just to be really clear, advanced requests are not legal. We're still working towards that. This last question, right now we're working on advanced requests for those with a capacity diminishing diagnosis. So that's an individual, generally speaking, who has Alzheimer's or dementia, a disease of that nature that's neurocognitive. Eventually, we would like to see advanced requests for anyone. So me, in the event I fall down the stairs tomorrow and have a traumatic brain injury, I would like to have an advanced request in place. That's step 2, because we think it's going to take some time to get there. So just a few qualifiers. And then I think the other thing, just to note, if the person that you're asking about or your loved one already has dementia and does not have capacity, there will not be an option for advanced requests for them, even if the law changes. Okay, so it's a very sad situation, and I'm sorry we can't do more about it, but I think just to be clear for people, if your loved one is already in that position, advanced requests will not be an option, even if they become legal.
And I think too, just to piggyback off of that, having a diagnosis of dementia doesn't mean that a light switch is flipped, and that means that automatically a person can't access MAID. I think as many of us know, with a diagnosis, there's often quite a bit of time between that diagnosis and when somebody loses capacity and fails to ever regain that capacity. So if somebody does have dementia and it's early enough, then maybe there's good days or bad days with that diagnosis and that capacity, people can still call the care coordination team and get some additional information based on that individual situation. But like Helen said, if it is that person who is not regaining capacity and they've been in that state for quite some time, then unfortunately, MAID would likely not be an option there.
All right, thanks everybody for jumping in there. We have a question here that's more directed, that could be directed rather to each of the departments. So anybody that wants to jump in, please feel free to go ahead. This audience member asks, what can a person that is interested in your cause do to help to move it forward? So, Chris, Helen, you've already spoken about the advocacy toolkits or the e-petition. Maybe Alicia, you can speak a little bit on the social media or communications aspect.
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing that we're really pushing right now is for our supporters to submit letters to the editor or op-eds in support of the issues that are most important to them. So right now, that's really advanced requests that we're focused on, but also MAID and mental disorders, institutional religious obstructions, anything that you're passionate about. So if you do have an opinion that you'd like to share with the media to help kind of educate people across Canada about these end-of-life options, we can support you. You can email us at media@dyingwithdignity.ca. Maybe we can put that in the chat for people. And we can share with you how to do that, what the process is like, and share any key messages to help kind of round out your story. That's the number one thing. The other thing that you can do is share your story on our blog. So we post every single week on our blog every Friday with stories of people across Canada with experiences ranging from palliative care, MAID, lots of end-of-life topics. So there is a section on our website where you can share your story under Get Involved. We can put the link in the chat as well there. But yeah, so Sarah on the marketing communications team manages the blog. So she will reach out to you if you submit your story and see if it's possible to share it in that way. Those are the two ways that come to mind right now outside of the advocacy items that Chris has already shared. But yeah, we always love your help, and our supporters are always very engaged, and we really appreciate that.
Thanks, Alicia. Kelsey, anything to add from the support and program side about what people can do to stay involved and support our cause?
I think that covers it. As Sarah mentioned earlier, if there are any open volunteer opportunities, those are listed on our website, and the volunteer@dyingwithdignity.ca email is available as well. So as we recruit more volunteers for those specific programs, we will be posting online.
All right, wonderful. Thank you, everybody. We're going to answer some more questions here. Keep those ones coming, folks. Let's take a look here. Kelsey, Chris. This audience member is asking a follow-up question about the political positions on MAID, specifically with the political parties. This audience member is asking about the Green Party. They ask, the Green Party is very small, but what is their position, if any, on MAID?
Yeah, so I've actually met with one of the two Green MPs, and they are generally in support of MAID. Certainly, we're very favorable to C14 and C7. They, I noticed one of the Green MPs voted with Ed Fast against MAID for a mental disorder as the sole underlying condition. So I would say they're a little bit ambivalent about that expansion of MAID, but would be, from my own assessments, quite supportive of advanced requests. So they are kind of cautious in terms of where they line up on those issues.
All right, thank you, Chris. Next question. And Helen, maybe you can answer this. This is more a follow-up to the question about donations and funding for DWDC, and maybe you can just clarify. This audience member asks, in general, where does DWDC get their funding from? And I think that's a bit of a loaded question because there's quite a lot of sources, but if you'd like to tackle it.
Yeah, it's really not. Most of our funding comes from, and by most I mean 90+% comes from individual donors, so individuals across the country, and small foundations, most often family foundations. So we have a large number of donors who contribute a small amount on a monthly basis, and we have a large number of donors who give us, a gift once a year. But the vast bulk of our funding comes from individuals across Canada and small family foundations.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. And thanks, audience member, for your question. Let's ask another one here related to advocacy. This audience member mentions, I'm concerned that with polarizing issues like MAID and MDSUMC, elected persons vote based more on their personal convictions rather than the majority of their constituents. Is there any work being done to ensure that constituents are consulted? This is of personal concern to me because I'm quite supportive of MAID, but the MP of my area is conservative.
So that's a great question, and it is the dilemma on an issue like this. We use things like the petition, polling, any of our public statements to demonstrate to MPs that there is a wide cross-section of support within their own ridings for many of these enhancements and so on. But notwithstanding that, of course, the MPs, through various things like whip voting and caucus discipline, end up adhering to the party line on these questions. So I think really the ultimate thing that you can do is to go in and speak to your MP respectfully and politely, but say, listen, I think I need you to examine what this issue means to me as a constituent and to many of the folks who live in this riding. We feel strongly about it. And I think that there's an argument to be made that those convictions should outweigh the political allegiances and loyalties of these MPs. At the end of the day, we can't force that, but that has got to be the main approach here.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Chris. Next question, and Kelsey, I think I'll direct this to you. This audience member asks, how many times can you renew a waiver of final consent?
So in the legislation, it doesn't specify a number of times that can be renewed. So it is something that a person would need to discuss with their MAID provider. The other thing that people who are going through the process may wish to ask is about the length of time, because again, it's not spelled out in the legislation, but certain providers will often have sort of a limit on how far out, how many weeks or months away that MAID date can be set for. So short answer is it is more a clinical decision and something that a person would need to raise individually.
All right, thank you so much. Next question, and I think we'll go here on we're wrapping up for time here. Next question here, this audience member asks, I have heard in the past that clinicians are not being paid in a timely manner for providing services for MAID as a provider or assessor, or that in some cases, assessors are not being paid at all. Can you comment on this?
Well, I can speak to the issue about nurse practitioners. I believe that most clinicians, maybe Kelsey can speak to this. I understand that they normally are able to claim that procedure under their billing rights. But in the case of nurse practitioners who don't have access to that and who must be funded out of local healthcare authority budgets, for the assessment and provision of, particularly of track 2, where there's, well, for both tracks, but certainly the complex cases, this is a recurrent refrain that we're hearing, that many folks, nurse practitioners, are not being paid. They're doing this work voluntarily, out of compassion and kindness to the folks who are requesting this, certainly in rural parts of Ontario and Canada. So that is true, and it's tragic. And we have requested the government of Ontario reassess that, and in light of the growing demand for MAID, that they deal with these budgetary constraints. But thus far, that appears to be falling on deaf ears. But maybe Kelsey could add something there.
I don't think I have anything to add. Yeah, there are billing codes for doctors, and they'll typically use specific ones for MAID, and the nurse practitioner issue is a bit more complicated depending on geography and the person's employer situation and various things. But unfortunately, there have been several barriers for nurse practitioner payment.
Right, thank you so much, Chris and Helen. So we are just wrapping up here on questions. Anybody else that has questions for our departments today, please feel free to submit them in the Zoom side panel. And again, of course, any questions that are more personal in nature or relate to your personal circumstances, to you or a loved one, please feel free to connect with us at support@dyingwithdignity.ca. And we'll just give a couple more seconds here to see if folks have any more questions for us.
Amanda, can we maybe just quickly touch on, I noticed there was quite a few comments, not so much questions, most of them, but comments around concerns about individuals who might choose to die by suicide in the event that MAID MDS-UMC does not go through, or if the law changes. And I think maybe just to reassure people that we are very cognizant of that concern, and we share it, and we have communicated that message in a variety of ways to the health minister and the justice minister. Kelsey mentioned her warm handoff program. We are continuing to grow those programs so that people who may be in distress are able to, even if they come to us, we're able to get them to the right place. So there are mental health resources listed on our website. Canada now has a national number that you can call, 988, for mental health support calls. So if you're in that situation, please don't hesitate to reach out to us and we will get you to somebody. But rest assured, we have communicated this very real concern to the government.
Thank you, Helen. We do actually have a follow-up question here related to advocacy, and specifically more on advance requests, and maybe asking about the latest results from our previous Ipsos poll. This audience member asks, what's the current percentage of Canadians that are in support of advance requests for MAID?
Yeah, so our polling done last June would indicate it's in the range of 80 to 82%. That was corroborated by another poll done by the Globe and Mail, in which Nanos was commissioned to research that same question, and they came out with a similar finding of about 80%. And the vast majority of those are strongly committed to it. It's not sort of somewhat committed. So it is a universally popular law change that is found across regions and faiths. So this cuts across every kind of category of Canadian. So yeah, in that 80% range.
Thank you, Chris. Next question. This audience member asks, does DWDC have a strategy or approach for raising awareness of and helping to increase the number of MAID practitioners in areas where there are known shortages?
When there are what shortages? Sorry, I didn't hear that last bit.
They're talking about known shortages of MAID assessors or providers in areas, and I'm not sure if Kelsey or Helen, you have anything to speak to this on, but what's our general involvement, or what's our approach in necessarily on where shortages are of MAID assessors and providers in certain areas of Canada?
Sure. I mean, I think most immediately Kelsey and her team deal with getting people to the right place if that's an issue that an individual is experiencing. We have hosted a few open learn about MAID sessions as kind of an introduction to MAID for clinicians who maybe aren't yet ready to assess or provide, but have a little bit of interest in it. So we host those sessions, and then we connect those people to CAMAP, which is the Canadian Association of MAID Assessors and Providers, so that they can support them in their education. CAMAP released last year a national curriculum for MAID. So there are lots more opportunities for clinicians to become educated. So we share in the promotion of that. And then another thing that Kelsey and her team is working on is outreach to various programs that would include students or newer medical experts to kind of introduce them to MAID, and then also get that little piece of interest, turn that into an opportunity for them to participate in MAID.
And I wonder if I could just jump in and add something to there on the policy side. That is a kind of regrettable development for those of you on the call that are calling in from Alberta. The College of Physicians and Surgeons of Alberta has put forward a discussion document about MAID and so on, and they're now suggesting that, and this will constrain availability of access to services to a certain extent, that physicians who have a personal objection to MAID may not be required to provide what's called an effective referral going forward. That we believe already exists in Manitoba to a certain extent. So the point is very well taken that there are a small number of MAID clinicians willing in the first place, and then there are a growing number who may not be willing to provide even an effective referral. So that's a policy issue that we believe that residents and citizens of those provinces should be writing to their health minister to say, listen, this is a lawful procedure under the Canada Health Act, and an individual suffering ought to triumph over the discretionary views of a clinician who may not even want to provide an effective referral, which is in the law at the moment, is something they're obligated to do.
Thank you so much, Helen and Chris. We're just going to wrap up the session here with a few more questions from our audience. So again, audience members, feel free to submit questions. Let's take a look here. Okay, this one is more directed towards marketing and communication. So Alicia, you might want to feel free to jump in. This audience member is asking about a recent publication that portrays DWDC in a negative light from the Walrus. Has DWDC made any comment or plans to write a piece to counter it?
Yes, yeah, we did see that publication. Very frustrating, as I'm sure it was for all of you. We did submit a response this morning. So our hope is that it will get published and that, Canadians will see the other side because there was a lot of inaccuracies in that piece. So we did submit a response, and if it gets published, it will be available in our media center on the website.
All right, thank you,
Maybe-
Alicia. Yeah, go ahead, Helen.
Maybe important to note too that we are aware of a number of both chapter members and supporters who have already written their own responses to that article as well. So thanks for that support if you're out there.
Thank you, as always. All right, folks, we're going to give it a couple more minutes here. Anybody else have final questions? And I'll also just ask the panel if any final remarks they'd like to add or anything that they'd like to clarify from previous. All right. Going once, going twice here on anybody else with follow-up questions for our panel. Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and close today's session. Thank you so much to everybody who joined us today to share their department's priorities for this year, as well as achievements from last year. Thank you so much, of course, to our supporters and donors and volunteers that helped to make our mission a reality and a success. As always, we'll have future webinars set up in store. Please stay tuned through our newsletter or social media accounts. Our next webinar will be tomorrow, Wednesday, January 17th, with our Regional Spotlight series discussing the MAID program in the province of Alberta. And thank you so much to everybody for joining us here today. And I wish everyone a pleasant afternoon and also a happy new year and best of wishes for 2024. So thank you, everyone, and goodbye.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.